I realized I was involved in something wrong the moment I noticed that nobody wanted to know where I was. There was no threat, no warning, no insistence, just a total absence of interest. For a truck driver, that's more dangerous than a police car in your rearview mirror, because it means someone has already decided what's going to happen to you, and there's no need to discuss it. The delivery request came through the app in the early hours of the morning. The price was too high for the distance, the description too brief to justify the urgency. Origin, an intermediate yard in Arkansas. Destination, an unnamed warehouse in southern Missouri. The delivery window didn't fit any clear route. If I followed the main road, I'd arrive late. If I took secondary roads, I'd end up in areas with no signal and slow to get help. Still, I accepted. I'd had 3 bad weeks, and when the system starts offering you money without questions, you learn not to ask questions either. The cargo consisted of sealed pallets, all identical, with no visible markings. The total weight was within the normal range, but poorly distributed, as if someone had rearranged everything in a hurry. The supervisor at the Origin didn't check anything with me. He simply indicated the loading dock, waited for me to attach the load, and turned his back. There was no physical signature. Everything was digital, too fast for me to be sure that someone was actually responsible for it. I left the courtyard while it was still dark, the sky trapped in that cold gray that precedes dawn. The app suggested an alternative route within the first few kilometers, diverting from the main road. Nothing illegal, just less used. The kind of road that shortens the journey, but lengthens the problems. I hesitated for a few seconds before confirming, more by instinct than by calculation. As soon as I entered the turnoff, I lost the radio signal. There was no static, no weakness. It just disappeared. The dashboard continued to show everything normal, but the absence of that constant noise made the cabin feel too large. I instinctively increased the volume. Nothing responded. The absence of static was worse than interference, because it seemed intentional. The first physical sign that something was wrong was the traffic. There were no cars, no trucks, not even an animal on the road. I drove for almost 20 minutes without encountering absolutely anything. Not a distant light, not a reflection on the horizon. Just the white lines passing under the headlights and the feeling that the road had been emptied before I even got on. The tension started there because an empty road isn't normal. Not even in the middle of the night. There's always someone who's wrong on time, someone who's late, someone rushing to get there early. There was nobody there. I looked at the tank and the engine temperature gauge as if checking my own pulse. The navigation app stopped updating the estimated time. The distance decreased, but the clock remained frozen. It was as if I was moving forward without consuming time. That affected me more than any siren would, because it couldn't possibly be a common error. I stopped trusting even my own perception. A few kilometers later, I saw the first truck stopped on the shoulder. Lights off, door closed, no warning lights. It seemed intact. I slowed down slightly, trying to see if anyone was inside. I saw no movement. As I passed by, the tracker beeped briefly once as if it had registered an event. I felt the skin on the back of my neck tighten. I didn't stop. Not because it was prudent, but because something told me that stopping was exactly the mistake someone was waiting for. If I stopped there, I would cease to be part of a movement that seemed necessary for something else. Other trucks came, always with their engines off, always empty, always at regular intervals, as if they had been positioned to mark territory. Each time I passed one, I felt a tightness in my stomach, as if I were crossing an invisible line. I started counting, trying to find logic. The interval was almost perfect, as if someone had defined the spacing. A message appeared on the panel without an audible warning. Route under monitoring. Maintain continuous movement. There was no option to respond. There was no help button, just the instruction. The phrase had the same tone as a maintenance warning, but the content was an order. From that point on, my mind went into survival mode. I started calculating everything. Fuel, engine temperature, tire pressure, consumption. Any mechanical failure would force me to stop, and I had no doubt that whoever stopped would have to stop. I had never felt the need to be perfect while driving, but there I needed to keep the machine running as if my survival depended on it. The asphalt looked different. No longer smooth, but slightly rough, as if it had been recently redone. The road signs were too new, without impact, without dirt. without signs of time. That stretch wasn't old. It was well maintained. It was property, even without a sign saying so. I tried to get off course when I saw a side road that seemed to lead to a small town. The app hadn't suggested it, but I knew the urge to seek civilization when something's wrong. As soon as I signaled and started pulling the steering wheel, the dashboard flashed and the truck lost response for a second, as if someone had held the steering wheel in place. It wasn't physical. It was electronic. The engine didn't stall. The steering wheel didn't lock, but the correction was too precise to be just wishful thinking. I returned to the lane. My heart was pounding, and I found myself looking at my hands as if they weren't mine. It felt like the truck was responding to commands as long as I stayed within the plan. The radio came back on for a few seconds with a dry crackle. A voice came on, unidentified, without any emotion. It didn't mention my name. It didn't mention the cargo. It only asked for confirmation that I was still moving. The question seemed more like a test than a communication. I didn't answer. I didn't want to teach the system that I obeyed when it spoke. Soon after, a dark SUV appeared behind me. It didn't accelerate, it didn't slow down. It just maintained the same distance like a reflection in the rearview mirror. I adjusted my speed. It adjusted its speed too. Low beams, invisible license plate, no markings. That wasn't an escort. It was visual confirmation. I realized my breathing was short and that I was gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The air inside the cabin felt drier. I thought about stopping just to get out and breathe, but the message of continuous movement didn't need repeating itself. It had already become a rule in my head. The first sign of fatigue came early. It wasn't sleepiness, it was tension. I felt that any distraction would be used against me. I started choosing spots on the asphalt to maintain focus, as if the road could hypnotize me. I drove through a section where the center line had recently been repainted, and that reinforced the feeling of control. The road was being cared for as if it were too important to let deteriorate. At the same time, there were no roadwork signs, no cones, no company responsible. It was maintenance without any clear authority. When the fuel level dropped more than it should have, I felt panic rising. Fuel consumption was high, but not enough to justify that drop. I recalculated and realized it didn't add up. I couldn't stop at a gas station because there weren't any. The route seemed designed for me to drive through with what I had, without stopping. The dashboard indicated a pressure variation in one of the rear tires. It was a brief warning and then it disappeared. Even so, it calmed me down. It wasn't the kind of fault you ignore. I slowed down, and the SUV slowed down too. I increased my speed, and it increased its speed. The warning wasn't about safety. It was about continuity. A little further ahead, I saw a truck overturned off the shoulder, in the low grass. There were no emergency lights, no warning signs. It looked old and new at the same time. The cab was intact but displaced, as if it had been pushed without violence. I couldn't see the driver. The image stayed in my head as a warning. The mistake doesn't need to be punished immediately. It can simply be removed. The destination appeared unmarked. A wide entrance, open gates, enough lighting to make it seem like normal operation. I entered without receiving explicit instructions. 2 employees approached but didn't speak to me. They only pointed to the dock indicated on the app. They moved quickly without looking at my face, as if my face wasn't relevant. During the unloading, I remained in the cabin. The trailer vibrated with the movement, but the weight seemed to shift in the wrong way, as if it wasn't just being removed. I listened to the forklift's movements and tried to mentally match what was coming out with what had gone in. There was no checking, no questions, no doubts. They knew exactly what they wanted to take out. When they finished, the app marked the delivery as complete. Exact time, no delays, no early arrivals, no inconsistencies. The alternate route didn't appear in the detailed history. It was as if I had skipped that section of the map. The disappearance of the route was more incriminating than any faulty log, because it meant that someone had authorization to delete the road. On the way out, the SUV was no longer there. The radio was working. The traffic had returned. The world seemed too normal for someone who had just crossed a corridor devoid of time. I felt the urge to tell someone, not out of courage, but out of a need to confirm that it had happened. The urge died before it could become a sentence. Hours later, I received the notification. Profile reclassified due to operational behavior. Access to common freight temporarily limited. There was no accusation, no explanation, no appeal. It was just an adjustment. The kind of adjustment that puts you in a group you didn't choose. In the following days, the offers changed. Tight windows, alternative routes, high payments, short instructions. Always the same logic. Always the same tension. Always the certainty that I was being chosen, not offering anything. The system wasn't punishing me. It was repositioning me. I tried to refuse. The app responded by further narrowing down the options. I tried accepting a mundane delivery to a hardware store, something clean, something predictable. The offer disappeared at the last second, as if someone had pulled it off. It wasn't the marketplace. It was a filter. The penny dropped one afternoon when I stopped in a secluded parking lot to get some water and stretch my legs. I saw a truck just like mine, same color, same model, parked a few meters away. The driver was sitting on the curb, his hands hanging loose, staring into space. He didn't seem tired. He seemed detached. I tried to get his attention. He didn't react. He didn't even lift his head. His presence there, motionless, was the same pattern as the trucks with their lights off the side of the road. The difference was that now there was a visible body occupying the place of what was previously just metal. That's when I understood the whole mechanism. It wasn't about illegal cargo. It was about screening, testing who can keep going without stopping, without asking, without registering. Those who fail are left behind, outside the grid. Those who continue end up being used as a means of transportation on routes that shouldn't officially exist. Since then, I've driven by a fixed rule. I never stop when nobody wants me to stop, because on this invisible path they've put me on, the real risk isn't being chased. It's being discarded. And when you realize you can flip a stalled truck on the side of the road without needing an accident, you learn to keep the engine running even when your body tells you otherwise. If you're enjoying the stories, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment. It really helps the channel. Let's get to the next story. I noticed the problem before parking, when I saw the amber lights reflecting on the wet asphalt and realized that the rest area was too small for so much shade. I had been driving down the interstate since late afternoon, carrying a light, dry load, and just wanted a quick place to wash my face and stretch my back. The sign advertised services, but the access was narrow, with old paint and misplaced cones as if someone had hastily reopened it. I had promised myself I wouldn't stop in places I didn't know, but the horizon was already becoming double, and my eyes were dry from staring at the rearview mirror. The choice was between making a mistake driving or making a mistake stopped. The parking lot was an irregular rectangle surrounded by tall grass and low fences. A closed restaurant, a row of parking spaces, and in the back, a maintenance shed with dented metal doors. No trucks lined up, no steady flow of traffic. Only silence. The lighting came from two flickering streetlights creating blind spots. When the streetlight went out, the back of the lot disappeared completely, and when it came back on, everything returned like a photograph, without apparent movement. A truck was positioned across the road near the exit, its cab at an angle as if it had stopped to block the way. Lights off, dark cab, unmarked trailer. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like a setup. The positioning was so precise that I could imagine the turning radius designed to trap any large truck. It was a discreet roadblock, the kind that doesn't call the police but prevents escape. I hesitated with the truck still moving, calculating the maneuver to get out. It wasn't possible. The access behind me was too narrow and the main road was only a few meters away. If I stopped in the middle, I would become an obstacle and attract the wrong kind of attention. I pulled in slowly and parked in a side spot, keeping the engine running. The headlights illuminated the ground in short streaks, and that's when I saw fresh drag marks near the shed, furrows in the dust and mud leading inward as if something heavy had been pulled. The smell of old oil and cold frying oil came from the closed restaurant, and it gave me the feeling of an abandoned place that was still being used. Places like that always have people around, but they don't show up when you want them to. I thought about calling and leaving right away, but the blocked exit forced me into a stupid choice. Either I moved closer to the blocked truck to try and maneuver, or I stayed where I was and hoped it was just carelessness. I chose to stay for a few seconds, and that window was enough. The entrance had been chosen to make me feel like I still had control, when in reality I was already inside. I had no way out without going through the point where they wanted me to go. From the shed came a loud, dry, metallic crack, followed by a second impact that didn't sound like a tool. Then, a long scraping sound, like a chain running over concrete. The kind of sound you feel in your teeth, not your ears. I felt the sound pass through the steering wheel, as if the vibration had entered my truck. It reminded me of how many times I'd ignored small noises, thinking it was just the road. I didn't see anyone, but I felt a presence. The shadows weren't standing still. A quick movement passed by the windshield of the truck I was driving across and disappeared, as if someone had ducked down upon noticing me. It wasn't agitation. It was discipline. The kind of discipline you see in people who have repeated the same procedure in other places. I tried to reverse to gain space. The trailer hit the curb and the whole thing locked up for a moment. That jolt that makes your body imagine a flat tire even when it hasn't. I went back to the front and stopped again, without improving anything. With each maneuver attempt, I got closer to the sideways truck, closer to the point of approach. I had the impression that my own instinct to correct was leading me to the wrong place. The side door of the shed opened and a figure emerged, dragging something along the ground. It wasn't a pallet. It was a body being dragged carelessly, knees hitting the steps, head limp. The person pulling stopped and looked in my direction, as if I had stepped onto a stage. The body left a dark trail in the mud, and I saw the man's boot slip once, as if he were in a hurry to finish. The hurry there wasn't fear of being caught. It was a hurry not to be interrupted. I locked the doors and felt my blood run cold. The engine was still running, but the exit remained blocked. The only route was to pass close to them, and that was no longer a reasonable option. I knew that if I turned on the high beams and pointed them straight ahead, I would have a clear image for a second, but it would also make it clear that I was reacting. Reacting was what they were waiting for. A second man appeared near the back of my trailer, walking straight for the air hoses, like someone who knows exactly where to cut to turn a truck into an anchor. He didn't look up, just worked quickly with his hands too close to my blind spot. He was carrying a short tool in his hand, something that could have been large pliers or cable cutters. The way he held it said it wasn't improvised. It was a kit. I tried honking, not as a cry for help, but as a reflex to force a reaction and attract the attention of someone curious. The sound was short and died away inside the empty courtyard. There was no one to hear it, and they weren't startled. This confirmed that they were comfortable there. The horn echoed back as if I were inside a tank, and I felt ashamed for having thought someone would come running. The first man came from the side of my door, slowly, as if testing whether I would make a move that would justify something worse. He didn't bang on the metal, didn't shout, didn't make a scene. He just approached calmly, and calmness in that context was a weapon. He kept his head down and his shoulders relaxed, as if he had already decided on his next move and was just waiting for confirmation that I wouldn't make it easy. I saw a glint in his hand, small, which could have been a blade or just metal reflecting. The sound of escaping air came next, short and aggressive. The pressure dropped quickly and the trailer brake locked hard. Even if I could move the truck, I wouldn't be able to take the load, and without it I would lose seconds trying to unlock it while they decided what to do with me. The locked brake turned the trailer into a wall. If I tried to accelerate, I would only break parts and give myself away with the noise. I was trapped in the worst kind of prison, the one where you still believe you can choose. I thought about getting out the passenger door and running, but run where with the yard fenced off and the highway right there exposed? Even so, staying inside the cabin felt like a cage. The glass doesn't hold someone who doesn't want witnesses. I thought about the phone, but my signal was weak there, and I knew dialing with shaky wires could make me lose the little time I had. Besides, calling for help meant staying there until help arrived, and I didn't have that time. I crawled across the console, unlocked the passenger door and opened it just enough to avoid making noise. I slid down, feeling the cold bite my throat, and leaned against the side of the truck as if I were part of it. I felt the gravel sink into the soles of my boots and thought about how much the sound of a footstep can reveal a life. I took short breaths so as not to create steam on the window and give away my position. I used the truck as a wall and went backward, stepping on loose gravel. I heard footsteps speeding up from the other side, and a short shout, more of an order than a scare. I didn't need to understand the words to know I had been classified as a problem. I heard something hit the metal, not loudly, more of a tap to locate something, like someone searching for a lock with their ear. That made me understand that they were also controlling the panic, and whoever controls the panic usually wins. A shot hit the ground near my foot, kicking up damp dust. It wasn't a warning. It was an attempt. I threw myself behind a pile of broken concrete and stood motionless for 2 seconds, feeling the palm of my hand slip on mud and gravel. The shot gave me physical certainty, and physical certainty is different from suspicion. Until then, I was afraid. After the shot, I had a goal, not to be found. From behind the shed came another impact, followed by absolute silence. A silence of completion. The kind of silence that makes you realize the next thing to fall could be you. I imagined the body I had seen being dragged away and understood that there was no possible negotiation. If they had already crossed that line, I was just a second line of clearing. I heard the creak of the truck door blocking the road, and then the engine started. The lights flashed on, as if someone had decided to abandon the charade and leave. If they were going to leave, I needed to be out of there before they decided to take me with them. The engine starting meant withdrawal, and withdrawal meant the set was closing. If I stayed, I would become part of their inventory. I stepped off the concrete and ran toward the back fence where the tall grass hid holes and pallet remnants. My pants ripped on the first splinter and my leg burned, but I kept going. Behind me, footsteps parted, trying to push me into the open area. The grass was tall and wet, trapping my feet, and I almost fell into a hidden drainage hole. The fear there was falling and making a noise. I reached the lowest point of the fence and jumped. I landed awkwardly on the other side, my hand hitting a stone. The pain came clean and immediate, and I knew I'd cut my palm. The blood gushed out hot, but that only gave me one concrete thing to focus on. I felt the rust scrape against my jacket and, for a second, thought I was stuck. My heart pounded so hard I thought they'd hear. I rolled down the embankment to the edge of the highway and threw myself into the bushes, out of the headlights' range. Lying there, I saw their truck speed away, followed by a smaller vehicle that drove off with its lights off for a few seconds, as if it didn't want to be remembered. The smaller vehicle had the kind of muffled exhaust that doesn't belong on a typical highway car. It was something designed to go unnoticed. I stayed there until the noise died down and the sky cleared enough for me to see my own trembling hands. When I returned, my truck was still stuck, lines cut, trailer jammed, and the shed bore signs of a struggle. Before the police arrived, I tried to restart the trailer and confirm the cut lines with a flashlight. Clean, without any irregular tears. A professional cut. If I had insisted on maneuvering, I would have been left exposed in the middle of the yard, just a few meters from the shed. I called 911 from a spot where I had signal. I described the location, the immobilized truck, and signs of violence in the shed. I knew that if I tried to explain too much, I'd get caught. I waited with my hand bleeding and the taste of metal in my mouth, trying to keep my mind on what I could prove. The police arrived with low sirens and bright flashlights. The warehouse showed signs of a struggle, blood on the floor, tools scattered, and a body that wasn't mine. The truck that had been blocking the road was gone. The SUV, if it existed, left no trace. An officer looked at me as if he were testing me for lies. I didn't give any extra reason. I showed my documents, explained the stop due to fatigue and the attempt to leave. The cut lines spoke for themselves. Still, I felt that the place had been chosen to swallow me whole. In the following days, I silently replayed the scene, trying to recall useful details. What I remembered most clearly wasn't faces or license plates. It was their efficiency. They knew where to play, how much time they had, and how to get out. I just walked into the wrong space at the wrong time. I changed my routes and started avoiding small stops, the kind that seemed too convenient for the time of day. I avoided parking lots with only one exit and areas that depend on a single truck to become a maze. Even today, when I see a horse at an angle near an exit, my body reacts before my mind. I slow down, look for another option, and continue on without looking too closely. Some nights aren't meant for rest. They're meant for knocking someone out. And in that one, I almost was next. 1 minute on my wristwatch became 12 on the dashboard clock. And that silent jump was the kind of error that doesn't happen by chance in a modern truck with telemetry, GPS, and automatic time recording. I was driving through western Kansas, off the interstates, on a long, empty state road that connects small towns to even smaller towns. On the map, it looked simple, but the freight paid as if I were crossing a border with sensitive cargo. The asphalt had old patches, and the few cars that appeared were shadows that came and went, not following me long enough to become a point of reference. The shipment was labeled pharmaceuticals, sealed, with a short delivery window, and the dispatch app repeated generic instructions about route and compliance as if the risk was that I might improvise a break outside the script or enter the wrong post. The sender was a generic name. The address pointed to a block of identical warehouses, and the digital signature looked like a scribble meant to be forgotten. From the moment I picked up the load, the truck seemed more attentive than I was. Stability alerts appeared on flat stretches of road, the traction control flashed for no reason, and the dashboard displayed automatic sensor checks that I had never seen on that model. The kind of alert that usually appears when you're carrying too much weight or there's a strong crosswind. But that night there was no wind, and the truck behaved as if it were empty. I usually keep the regular radio low, and the CB radio almost always off. But that night even the silence seemed orchestrated. It was as if any noise could disturb someone counting my seconds and turning my day into a spectacle. Even my breathing seemed too loud. I found myself looking in the rearview mirror as if someone might be behind me inside the cabin itself. I pulled over to a wide shoulder just to urinate. I turned off the engine, applied the brake, and waited for the diesel to lose its vibration, because I like to conserve fuel, and because I didn't want to be seen stopped on that deserted road with such a clean manifest. The dashboard light reflected off the windshield, giving me the impression of being stopped in front of a shop window, even though there were no houses, no lampposts, nothing but darkness. When I returned, the dashboard said I had been stopped for 15 minutes. My cell phone showed 2, my wristwatch 2. The truck insisted on 15 with the same certainty as a signed document, and the difference wasn't due to time zones, it was due to a jump. The jump was clean, without any seconds lost. It simply reappeared ahead, as if someone had edited the file and saved over it. I started the engine and everything aligned instantly, as if the lie needed total stillness to exist and movement to hide within the flow where no one compares clock to clock. 20 miles later I stopped again without leaving the cabin. Engine off, brake pulled, legs still, eyes on the gauges waiting for what I didn't want to see, trying to be my own inspector in the middle of the night. I didn't want to admit I was scared, so I treated it as a test. Stop, observe, start, compare, as if I still had control. The clock skipped, and the ELD recorded a long pause with precise coordinates. Then, events in sequence. Cabin door open, trailer door open, brief voltage drop, clean restart, and a completed check stamp, all without me touching anything. The internal GPS also marked stopped before I actually stopped, as if anticipating my behavior and preparing the record in advance. The coldness of the log struck me because it was the kind of thing you don't argue with. If an officer looks at it, they won't believe my body. You'll believe the log. When I started the engine, events ceased as if the vibration expelled the lie. I felt a childlike urge to argue with the dashboard, as if it could hear. Instead, I remained silent, because stillness was the only thing I could still choose. At the next stop, I turned the assembly around with the flashlight. The seal was intact, the padlock unmarked, but the ABS harness on the trailer had a cover that was too new, the screw gleaming, the plastic clean, like a part hastily replaced by a seasoned hand. The overly new cover was the kind of detail that only catches the eye of someone who constantly looks for wear and dust. This one was as clean as something installed that week. I knelt on the gravel and saw a metal module attached to the stringer, a thin cable entering the harness and another cable disappearing into the floor. It had no markings, just a code and a neutral sticker. My first impulse was to photograph it, and that's when things got worse. The position was discreet, out of the field of vision of someone standing. but perfect for being close to the main harness. The module seemed designed to exist unnoticed. With the truck completely stopped, the cell phone camera froze. When the vehicle moved slightly, it worked again. With the engine running, the photo came out, but the image was blurry, as if the interference was choosing exactly what I couldn't capture clearly. I tried recording video. The audio came out, but the image froze in static frames, as if the camera only worked when I wasn't actually stopped. I thought about removing the module, but I knew how that would end up on paper. The alteration would be mine. The module could disappear afterward, and I'd be left with dirty hands, a perfect excuse to make myself a suspect in whatever was being manufactured. If I reported it, I needed to show something concrete. If I interfered, I'd be turning the concrete inside out. That's when I understood that the game was about pushing me towards a bad choice. I started observing where the anomaly occurred. It wasn't at a well-lit rest stop, nor in a crowded yard, nor in an official rest area. It was in an old pull-off, a side road entrance, a disused area, always near a traffic camera and far from human witnesses. After that, I began to notice that my best places to stop, the most discreet ones, were exactly the ones that seemed to trigger the anomaly, as if someone had studied truck driver habits. At one of those points, I saw another truck stopped, interior light off, engine off. When I turned mine off, my log recorded the same sequence, and by reflection, I saw the distant truck light up its dashboard as if it had received the same command. It started and drove off a few seconds after me. I didn't see the driver. I didn't see the cabin light, just the motionless outline. The feeling was of two pieces of equipment waiting for the same signal, and I was just the first to comply. Further ahead, a state patrol car was parked on the shoulder. It didn't move when I passed. The indifference bothered me because it seemed like preemptive approval, as if my profile was already marked as regular and invisible, despite what my log hid. I tried to read the policeman's face in the dark and saw nothing. The patrol car remained as a decorative object of authority, useful for intimidating those who aren't in the know. A mobile scale released my bypass with a green light too early. I didn't have an active transponder that week. Still, I was accepted, as if someone had paved my way before I arrived and before I even existed for that machine. The green light scared me more than a stop order, because a stop order is a human thing. That was a machine deciding for reasons I had no access to. On the first morning, the carrier sent an automated compliance notice, citing a recorded long pause and a possible audit. The text seemed standard, but the attachment was empty, as if someone just wanted proof that I received it and kept quiet. The notice mentioned log integrity and rest events. It was too bureaucratic to be a coincidence with what I was seeing on the dashboard. I tried to break the rule. Engine running, brake released, minimal vibration constant. Even so, the log recorded total immobility for minutes, and that chilled me because it meant that the record no longer depended on reality, only on the will of the person writing it. My stomach really tightened then, because until then I still believed that my action could prevent the error, and at that moment it became clear that my action was irrelevant. When I tried to access the telemetry settings, the menu appeared grayed out as administered. A quick notification appeared and disappeared. Then the dispatch app showed verification in progress, and I felt someone noticed my attempt to go off track and responded without contacting me. The quick notification looked like a remote lockout, as if someone had removed my permissions and left only what was necessary for me to continue operating, like a third-party operator. The following afternoon, an electronic panel prompted trucks with certain license plate endings to enter a temporary inspection. My ending was on the list. I went in, but before I reached the tent, the panel changed and my ending disappeared as if I had never been called. Nobody stopped me. I saw the list change in front of me. It felt like someone pulled my name from a queue without even looking at me, as if I wasn't allowed in that kind of interaction. The morning after that, a rural warehouse was robbed a few miles from a spot where my truck was supposed to have been stopped for almost half an hour. I had driven through without stopping. The log said the opposite with offensive precision, like ready-made proof before any questions. The news spoke of confused witnesses and contradictory times. I heard this and knew that was exactly the point. to confuse until the system appears to be the only reliable truth. I started driving in fear of basic necessities. Bladder problems and hunger became legal risks. Every stop was a chance for me to become part of a scene I would never see, lending normalcy to someone committing a crime on the other side of the road and on the other side of the report. I started holding on to water, eating less, planning each stop as if it were a life or death decision. The road became a corridor where the danger wasn't in the headlights, it was in what would be written later. On the second night, the log indicated a long stop on a secondary access road. I recognized the place on the map, but I wasn't there. I was miles away, driving at 60 miles an hour. Minutes later, I saw lights reflecting on the horizon and heard distant sirens. A confrontation had taken place right there on that access road, and my truck, on paper, was present, stopped, in good standing. The confrontation involved gunfire, but I didn't see the shooting. I saw the aftermath in the form of lights and a partial roadblock in the distance. The worst part was knowing that, on paper, I was one of the shadows present. I delivered the cargo to a stationary cross-dock. An employee scanned the seal without looking at me. The instant the scan was complete, the clocks aligned, the menus unlocked, and the log was wiped clean on top, like a cloth wiped over marks that remain underneath. The normalization was so quick it felt like a curtain falling. When I left the yard, my truck was back in the ordinary world, but my history wasn't. And I knew that if someone wanted to, they could denormalize it again. 2 hours later, another similar offer appeared. I refused. Since then, I avoid being still enough for the truck's reality to become the only one that matters.